When you open the book of 2 Kings, you might expect kings to be the main characters. But actually the star was a prophet, Elisha. He wasn't just a prophet who spoke. Elisha is a type of Christ. Elisha did 14 miracles and even raised the dead. But something sad also shows up. The Levites, who were supposed to guide Israel spiritually, had grown too close to the kings. They depended on them for their living, and so they stayed silent when kings sinned. That's why God raised up prophets like Elisha outside the system. They weren't tied down by politics or paychecks. They could boldly speak truth. And isn't it tragic that even today something similar happens? Many full-time clergy and church leaders, pastors, priests, and ministers, sometimes remain quiet when sin creeps into the church. Why? Because their livelihood depends on the same system they would have to challenge. Speaking up could mean losing their position, their salary, or even their reputation. History then takes a sharp turn. In 722 BC, the northern kingdom of Israel, hardened by sin under King Ahab, reached a point of no return. Assyria swept in and carried away the 10 tribes. These tribes were scattered, lost among the nations. The Assyrians moved foreigners into Israel's land. These people adopted parts of Jewish culture and faith. These became known as the Samaritans, like the woman who later spoke with Jesus at the well. About 140 years later, Babylon captured the southern kingdom, Judah. But unlike Assyria, Babylon let the people stay together. They preserved their language, culture, and faith even in exile. And after 70 years, God allowed them to return home. That's why today, the Jewish people trace back to Judah, the southern kingdom. But why did God allow his people to be taken away at all? Well, it's all because they had become just as evil as the nations before them. The land he gave them to cleanse from idols, now once again been filled with idols, so God scattered them. The Book of Lamentations even tells us how horrible things became. When the Babylonians laid a terrible siege against Jerusalem, they cut off food and supplies for so long that people starved. The suffering grew so desperate that some parents ended up eating their own children just to survive. It's almost unthinkable, but that's how far sin and rebellion against God had dragged them down. King Manasseh was perhaps the most evil ruler Judah ever had. He rebuilt shrines to idols, practiced witchcraft, and even sacrificed his own son in fire. He filled the land with violence and defiled God's temple itself. But when he was captured and carried away, something broke inside him. In the darkness of captivity, stripped of power and pride, he finally looked upward. There, in his lowest moment, Manasseh humbled himself before God. And incredibly, God heard him. The same God who had every reason to destroy him chose instead to forgive. And Manasseh was restored not because he deserved it, but because God's mercy runs deeper than our worst sins. Isn't that incredible? We can see that God is very forgiving and merciful as long as we repent. And the book ends with hope. King Jehoiakim of Judah, once a captive, is released and allowed to eat at the Babylonian king's table. A small detail, but a big reminder, God had not forgotten his promise to David. From that line would come Joseph and Mary, and ultimately Jesus. So what do we learn from 2 Kings? We see a faithful God, and he is just, merciful, and always keeping his word. The longer that men are in an institution, the worse the institution becomes. For example, kingdoms fall, companies fail, and many failures. The lesson is that if you leave men alone long enough, corruption and immorality will eventually cause the downward spiral. Good kings do not necessarily produce good sons. Grace does not run in the human line. Grace comes only from God. The message is clear. Our hope can never rest in human strength. It must rest in God alone. His standard is simple. He wants our hearts, our faith, our trust in him. So when you read 2 Kings, don't just see fallen kings. See the God who still reigns, the God who forgives, and the God who keeps his promises.